One of my viewers' little voice asked me to make a comment on a video by Sam Robbins called Sumo Wrestlers, Gaining Weight and Intermittent Fasting. So I thought I'd do this comment to clear up some of the confusion and misunderstandings that resulted from that video. Coming right up. Hey, I'm Dr. Ekberg with Wellness for Life, and if you'd like to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. So Dr. Sam apparently got the question, how can sumo wrestlers gain so much weight when they are doing intermittent fasting? So Dr. Sam did a video trying to explain that, and he said, number one, they skip breakfast, which slows their metabolism. And this does not happen if you are fat adapted. It does happen if you are insulin resistant and carbohydrate dependent, because if you're insulin resistant, then your body is fat storing. So you have lots of fat stores, but you can't access the fat store because the insulin keeps it locked away. So now, if you skip meals, your body perceives that as starvation because it's starvation in the midst of plenty. Insulin resistance is the early stages of diabetes, and diabetes is the full-blown starvation in the midst of plenty. They have hundreds of thousands of calories of fat stored on their body. They can't get to it because insulin locks it away. So if you're not insulin resistant, then skipping breakfast is not going to slow your metabolism as long as you're not completely emaciated. If you have at least a few pounds of fat on your body, that's not a problem. Number two, exercise in a fasting state increases cortisol and stress hormones, which leads to fat conservation. So this is almost the same answer as the first one, because this happens, the cortisol comes from you starving when you're carbohydrate dependent. So if you are fat adapted, that does not happen unless you're also at the same time, if the exercise that you're doing is anaerobic, meaning that it is at such a high intensity that you cannot keep up with oxygen delivery. Because now, in the presence of oxygen, if you can't keep up with oxygen delivery, you can burn fat. If you can't keep up with oxygen delivery, you can't burn fat. You need carbohydrates, and if you don't have carbohydrates and you can't get to the fat fast enough, now you need sugar and your body produces more cortisol. So it has to do both of those circumstances. It has to be high intensity and you have to be not accessing the fats. Number three, they eat 2 large meals 8 hours apart. No argument, that's what they do. Number four, they sleep after each meal. Again, no argument. Except, why do they sleep? Well, if you eat large amounts of foods, especially carbohydrate, and you're insulin resistant, now one of the backup mechanisms for the body to deal with all that blood sugar is to convert it into triglycerides. That's why sugar drives up triglycerides. So a lot of the fat lipid profiles that people, if they're out of balance and people are told, oh, you eat too much fat, that's not true. They're eating too much sugar because that's what turns into the triglycerides. And that conversion from sugar to triglycerides is very, very energy expensive. Your body uses up lots of energy to do that, so you get really, really sleepy. And with the amount of food that these guys consume, there's no mystery that they have to sleep after each meal. 5, they eat high carb, low fat. No argument there. That's what's going to pack on the fat. 6, they drink lots of beer. That's going to pack on the fat. 7, they eat with friends, which has proven to increase food consumption by 44%. So while that has been observed, we also have to ask, what is it that makes people eat too much? So think about that Thanksgiving meal. You had the turkey, you had the really fatty gravy, you had some accessories, and you are so full, you're saying, I can never eat another bite. And then they bring out the sweet pecan pie. And now all of a sudden you can make some more room because it's sweet. It's the sugar, it's the carbohydrates that bypasses your normal regulatory processes. Your body says you're full and you won't eat again if there's only real food available. But if sugar is being offered, you can always make another effort. So it's the sugar, it's the carbs that trick your body into eating too much. So if you only eat real food, whether you eat with friends or not, if there is no carbohydrate or sugar available, if there's meat and fish and vegetables and fat available, you're not going to overeat. So then he said this is why they gain weight. Then he went on to admit that yes, they do eat a lot of food. We're talking 8,000 to 20,000 calories. So if we just take the mid portion of that range, not the least, not the worst, then we'll end up somewhere around 15,000 calories. And he also said that they eat almost all carbs, virtually no fat and some protein. So that means they probably eat at least 70% of their calories from carbohydrates, which would put them at an absolutely astronomical 2,500 or more grams of carbohydrates per day. And he said that they also go and scout these people based on who is going to get fat, who has the big, thick structure already. So these are the real reasons that they get fat. Not so much that they skip breakfast or they exercise or that they eat 2 large meals. That has virtually nothing to do with it, and this is the healthy lifestyle. This is just insanity no matter what you eat. To eat 20,000 calories, to be so insulin resistant, you have to sleep, to eat high carb, low fat, to drink lots of beer. So we have to look at the whole picture. We can't just say, oh, well, these people do this, so that's why they get fat. You can't look at someone who wears a blue hat and is mean to dogs and say, oh, if I wear a blue hat, I'm going to be mean to dogs. Doesn't work like that. You have to look at the big picture. You have to look at what is it that they're doing so poorly, so crazy, that it throws off everything else. So based on this, he drew some conclusions, and he said that because they do this and get fat, it's better to eat several small meals rather than 2 large meals. And again, has nothing to do with it. What has to do with it is how much carbohydrate are you eating and how much total food are you eating? Are you insulin resistant as a result? Then he says they do eat too much carbohydrates. Amen. He suggests that you eat somewhere around 1/3 of your calories from each fat, protein, and carbohydrate. And that's certainly better than the official guidelines because they recommend 60 to 70% from carbohydrate and low fat. However, this might work 1/3 from each if you're already healthy, if you're not insulin resistant, if you have a normal body weight, if you stay physically active, if you eat whole food. I think you might get away with that. But if you have some health compromise, if you're insulin resistant, if you don't exercise every single day, then this is going to make you insulin resistant or keep you insulin resistant. Then he says calories matter, total calories matter, and that's not really true. It is the carb calories that matter because you couldn't really eat whole food without carbs. You can't eat enough meat and vegetables and fats. If you turn it into a contest, I suppose you could stuff down a lot of calories, but you couldn't keep it up because your body would just eventually say, hey, you know, I've had it. I don't want more food. So it's the carbohydrates that creates the storage that makes you able to keep eating that amount of food. Then he concluded that fasting exercise leads to cortisol, and that consequence is reduced muscle and increased fat. And it is true that cortisol causes that, but like we said above, it really only happens if you do high intensity exercise or if you're not fat adapted. If you do aerobic exercise, meaning you keep it at a intensity low enough that you're not huffing and puffing, now that exercise, that fasting exercise, does not result in a lot of cortisol. There's going to be a smidgen with every amount of exercise, but it's not going to trigger a lot of cortisol. And now you get fat burning. It's one of the best ways to burn fat is low intensity exercise while you are fat adapted. He says to keep the workouts short and intense, and totally agree with that. Then he says to do it 45 to 60 minutes. That's not short. If you do high intensity exercise, like you can check out this video right here on high intensity training, you want to do a warm-up, and then the intense portion of that should be no more than 5 to 10 minutes, because that gives you all of the hormonal benefits. It gives you all of the good hormones like human growth hormone and BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and it does give you a lot of cortisol on high intensity, but it's of such short duration, it doesn't have much of a long-term impact. The cortisol half-life is very, very fast, whereas the growth hormone half-life is very extended, so that level stays up 24, 48, 72 hours even. And he says sleep is important. No argument there. So we can't just look at what someone is doing and saying, oh, because they do that, it's going to cause this. If they do something that's absolutely insane, that's going to override anything else that they do. So yes, intermittent fasting is not going to work if you eat 20,000 calories, but it's not going to make it worse either. However, intermittent fasting will work wonders if you are fat adapted and you keep your carbs low, because now the intermittent fasting helps further reduce your insulin resistance. That's what it's really all about. You start off with low carb, maybe even keto, to reduce insulin resistance, and then you add intermittent fasting to it, because any period of time that you don't eat helps your body get less insulin in the system. So it has nothing to do with intermittent fasting, their weight gain. It has everything to do with the carbs and the insulin resistance that they have. So if you're doing intermittent fasting, do yourself a favor and do it with a low carb or even keto diet. Because if your body is carb dependent, then you're not going to be able to sustain these long fasts very well. You'll be starving, you'll be hungry, you'll be cranky, because your body says, give me some blood sugar, because you're not fat adapted. You can't access those fat stores very well. Your body will get to them eventually if you fast long enough, but you make it so much easier on yourself if you get your body fat adapted, because then you're more balanced and level to start with. Hope that this was helpful. If you enjoy this sort of content where we learn how the body really works, then make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. And please share this content with as many people as you can, because this is about health. It's not about treating symptoms or losing weight. It's about living and thriving for as long as possible. Thank you.